Tim's news explosion.
The arson firebombing of the Addas Israel Synagogue. So that is in Ripon Lee, which is an inner south suburb in what I term Melbourne's Jew Belt. And Victoria Police held a press conference today where Shane Patton, the Chief Commissioner, said they're treating it as a likely terrorist attack. And they said they handed the investigation over to the Joint Counter-Terrorism Unit. So that's the Victorian and Australian Federal Police. So in case all the specifics of what occurred in this synagogue attack, because most of the media reporting and political commentary has just been swept up about this is the worst anti-Semitic attack in Australia's history. But what occurred on Friday morning around 4:10 a.m. is that there were two arsonists who used an accelerant to maximize the fire, and they spread it with a broom. With the petrol, that's what they initially used, and then the accelerant. There were two people in the synagogue that morning. One wasn't there at the time. So according to the witness who was in there when he saw them, they were wearing, they were masked men. So he saw them, they ran away. He got his hand burnt. So there was one injury, but thankfully that was the worst that had occurred. And so there was huge damage done to the synagogue. And as I mentioned, the political fallout and the media commentary, that has what has been most dominant. Now, the Liberal Party, which is in the opposition at both the federal and Victorian level, so they have been, well, repeatedly said that they are 100% behind Israel and the Jewish community, and that more needs to be done to tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism, since it was on the rise post the October 7 Hamas attack in southern Israel. Hello to Dawn Browning. Hello to Paleoconservative Australian. Can you believe how much they are whinging about this stupid synagogue? Well, I can. And when it happened to Tim Lutz's house, police didn't even bother to collect the evidence. Well, if Victoria Police had nipped this suburban terrorism in the bud when last Christmas they found no suspects in Tim Lutz when his family car was firebombed in his home in Werribee. And the Herald Sun, because News Corp, they are practically a synagogue themselves. You could call Sky News Skynagogue News. The Herald Sun said Tim Lutz runs to police after car attacked. So really disparaging. Well, we don't know who's behind this likely terrorist attack on the synagogue, but we do know that Melbourne for too long has been terrorized by left-wing Antifa socialist groups, and we've also seen not just in Melbourne and Sydney, aggressive Islamist rallies as well. But Victoria Police, because their modus operandi has been to basically, their idea of keeping the peace is to make sure that the Antifa socialists and Islamists aren't too antagonized. And so that's why they pick on a relatively small group, the National Socialist Network, and also because it makes it look like they're doing they're doing something to please the Jewish community, even though we definitely know that the National Socialist Network are not responsible for the arson firebombing of the synagogue. We certainly know that. This is from Notice and News. Tim Lutz told Notice and News on Sunday there was a glaring contrast between the days of sympathetic all-to-all media coverage devoted to the arson attack on the synagogue and the hostile articles written after he was targeted on Christmas Eve last year. So he said the two-tier response from the media, Premier, the police, and the Prime Minister between the firebombing of my home and the synagogue should prove to every white Australian that Jews have a disproportionate amount of control over our nation. Well, I would say that the Antifa Socialist Islamist alliance, they've made their gravest mistake in picking on, well, you would say not just Australia's, but the world's most powerful lobby group. I mean, they got away, whoever was responsible got away with firebombing Tim Lutz's car. Well, we heard Shane Patton say it's only a matter of time, but he said he's making progress on, they said there's 3 suspects in this synagogue firebombing. Mr. Lutz on Saturday shared an image of a Herald Sun article with the inflammatory headline, Neo-Nazi Tim Lutz runs to police after family car torch outside Werribee home. And he wrote, Jews run to police after synagogue torch. They wouldn't write that. And he also told Notice and News, as far as I'm aware, not a single politician commented on the attack on my family, and the police did not collect physical evidence, including unexploded Molotov cocktails on my lawn and in my driveway, and did not take any photos. And certainly, Avi Yemeni of Rebel News, he didn't go down there to interview Tim because although obviously Avi, being Jewish, has absolute contempt for Nazis and the National Socialist Network, the left-wing terrorists who did this to Tim Lutz's family car, how does he know that they're not going to target him and his family? I know he did some crowdfunding for some fancy security outside of his home, but I'm sure that this synagogue would have had CCTV, but well, Shane Patton said that he's not going to go into operational matters, so maybe they do have some idea. They are tracking some suspects and just don't want to give them give any information that might alert them. But Avi Yemeni was there on Friday morning outside the synagogue, and he attempted to question the Premier, Jacinta Allan, who turned up at around lunchtime, but she just ignored him, but did attempt to answer a question by another prominent Melbourne Jewish activist, Mechelem Weikheimer, who he in the 2000s took part. He took Victoria Police. He took Victoria Police. Well, it was nearly a decade of litigation after a off-duty Victoria Police officer was driving a bus from the Torquay Footy Club, and they religiously vilified Mechelem Weimer and his children, and he stopped the bus, and then they took his Yamaha, and so he is a relentless a Jewish Jewish Melbourne activist. So he said to ask Jacinta Allan, have you lost control? And because he didn't like what she was saying, he kept interrupting and said, and then she was going to start and he kept interrupting her again. Well, you're not going to get a straight answer if you keep interrupting her. Now, Jacinta Allan, she said that the attack on the synagogue was another justification for the need to pass her government's enhanced anti-vilification laws. Jacinta Allan said that hate speech must be in the Crimes Act. So remember the maximum penalty, 5 years in prison for incitement or threat to hatred over not just race, religion, but sex, sexuality, gender identity, disability, status. It's likely in the aftermath of this synagogue attack that it'll get bipartisan support. So John Prosciutto, the opposition leader, is saying that Parliament should be recalled before Christmas to well, not just pass this, but also because Jacinta Allan has also promised that protests will be banned under outside places of worship, and the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has also pledged to introduce the same law. Now, Jacinta Allan says that this would be a constitutionally sound. They've got a precedent for it because of the 150-metre exclusion zones around abortion clinics, which ban pro-life activism, which was upheld in the High Court. Pro-life Catholic Club tried to challenge it. It was rejected. I mean, in my opinion, it is pretty low to protest outside a synagogue, church, any place of worship. And last week, there was a protest outside of Sydney's great synagogue by a group calling themselves the Stop the War of Palestine. So this was last Wednesday evening. Now, it wasn't a religious ceremony. It was an event to mark 100 years of the Israel Institute of Technology. So because it was a pro-Israel event, that's why they decided to protest. And there was a similar such protest, even though it was cancelled at the last minute, outside a Melbourne synagogue, though some activists still turned up. Because now they were the one in Sydney, the people inside the synagogue, they were in lockdown, holed up there for hours, and there was a couple who tried to go out and wave Jewish flags, and they were told to move, given a direction to move, to go back in. And again, New South Wales Police, their modus operandi is the same as Victoria Police. Keeping the peace is to not antagonise the Islamist Antifa Socialist coalition. And this is why this this synagogue attack appears to be the circuit breaker, where, as I mentioned, the Jewish lobby, they're one of the most powerful in the world, and so they are going to demand action again, because these are three groups that have also gone after nationalist, freedom, and gender critical activists as well. Well, maybe not. The Islamists are on the gender critical sides, but and some of them are part of the freedom community. But you see where I'm going here with the overlap there. So they're finally antagonized the wrong group, and there was nowhere for them to hide after the attack on the synagogue, because to this date, all of the Antifa, socialist and Islamist groups, they've all enabled, justified, excused the escalating, aggressive pro-Palestine activism, saying, oh, you're worried about this when there's a genocide going on in Gaza, but they all had to condemn it because they just knew that there was no way that, they could politically, other than condemn it. Now, this attack on the synagogue, it occurred about just over 24 hours after Australia at the United Nations voted for 3 pro-Palestine resolutions in the General Assembly. And it was actually published on Friday morning in the Australian newspaper, a statement from the office of Benjamin Netanyahu. And I'll try to do his voice. Australia's flip-flopping is disappointing, awarding anti-Semitism and terrorism with a state in the heart of the Jewish ancient homeland and cradle of civilization with more terrorism, more anti-Semitic riots at campuses and city centres, including in Australia. It's a shame that the current Australian government wants to award these savages with a state. Thankfully, our key allies support Israel as we strive for peace and security. I wonder if he made a similar strongly worded statement against New Zealand, who also voted with Australia, and so did Canada and the UK. That's what Anthony Albanese said, that we voted with most of our Five Eyes partners. And then, as I mentioned, not long after he made that statement, then we had the synagogue attack, likely a terrorist attack. And this wasn't just a statement through his office. This was posted to his X account. The burning of the Addas Israel Synagogue in Melbourne is an abhorrent act of anti-Semitism. I expect the state authorities to use their full weight to prevent such anti-Semitic acts in the future. Unfortunately, it is impossible to separate this reprehensible act from the extreme anti-Israel position of the Labor government in Australia, including the scandalous decision to support the UN resolution calling on Israel to bring an end to its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible and preventing a former Israeli minister from entering the country. Anti-Israel sentiment is anti-Semitism. No, it's not. Being critical of Israel, even anti-Zionism, is not anti-Semitism. Zionism is a political ideology, and even though most Jews are Zionist, it's still separate from Judaism as a religion. I know that there are many Jewish groups who want the anti-vilification laws to include criticism, or what they would term hate speech of Zionism, anti-Zionism, as the same as anti-Semitism. And I know that they tried to lobby Victoria Police, the various Jewish groups, to get Victoria Police to prosecute Hashtaya, the owner of the Burgatory restaurant, and as we found out recently, so Victoria Police said that the arson on his Caulfield store wasn't religious, motivated by his pro-Palestine activism, but the 2 arsonists confessed that they were paid, and also his home was firebombed. He's released a 4-minute video on his X account. And also he retweeted this account that there was a car a pro-Palestine car that was attacked up in Sydney, I remember. So yes, the overall point that I would make about this, and I've make the similar point when there was that riot between the Sikhs and the Hindus in Melbourne CBD at the beginning of last year. We do not want people who, well, they're living in Australia. Most are citizens, you would probably assume, bringing their grievances and turning it into violence on our streets and suburbs. In fact, Mark Latham, the now independent New South Wales Upper House MP, he certainly, I think, had some good commentary in the aftermath. If I can just bring it up here impromptu. I can't find it, but he basically said if anyone who wants to carry on a geopolitical conflict halfway on the road to Australia should leave. Now, as I mentioned, the absolute the further political polarization that has occurred in the aftermath. Now, I would say that most Australians would be appalled by an attack on a place of worship, but I would still maintain that this is not going to be an election defining issue, but this is almost all that Peter Dutton and the Liberal front bench have talked about the past few days. So Anthony Albanese, he's tried to preempt the Liberal and National Coalition's criticism of him for not being strong enough on anti-Semitism. So on Sunday, he announced that he was giving another round of funding to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry for Jewish community sites security, including synagogues and schools. So they will get 32.5 million. So they got 25 million in October 2023 in the aftermath of October 7, and so the total that the Albanese government has allocated 50 million for securing faith-based places grants program. But according to Peter Dutton and his Shadow Home Affairs Minister, James Paterson, who is a hardcore Zionist, that money was not good enough because it's been given to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry to organise the security, but this is not good enough because the strings attached to it, according to Peter Dutton and James Paterson, is they can't be armed. So, of course, the ordinary Australian is not allowed to be armed for self-defence. So this was their press statement this morning: real action to address the anti-Semitism and extremism crisis. A Dutton coalition government will act from day one to fix Labor's law enforcement crisis through a number of policy measures. Create a new dedicated anti-Semitism task force led by the Australian Federal Police, ASIO, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre and Australian Border Force. Issue a new ministerial direction to AFP to prioritise addressing anti-Semitism, including any outstanding complaints and unresolved crimes against the Jewish community. And this would be applied retrospectively. Direct the Anti-Semitism Task Force to refer any visa holders in acts of anti-Semitism for immediate cancellation and deportation. Amend Section 501 of the Character Provision Migration Act to ensure anti-Semitic conduct is captured by the law and applies retrospectively. Deliver the 32.5 million security funding package requested by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry without any strings attached, including funding armed guards in schools and synagogues, unlike the Albanese government restricted funding unarmed guards only. So that was Peter Dutton and his Shadow Home Affairs Minister, James Paterson, this morning. And Anthony Albanese later this afternoon announced that the Australian Federal Police would be forming an anti-Semitism special operation.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the referral of the Addas Israel Synagogue fire attack to the Victorian Joint Counter-Terrorism Team, which unlocks the powers and capabilities of the AFP, ASIO and Victoria Police. The AFP's remit is to protect Australians and Australia's way of life, and for many months the AFP has been discussing how we can better support our state and territory partners to investigate hate crimes or threats against vulnerable communities. Unfortunately, in Australia today, those of Jewish ethnicity or religion are being targeted because of who they are. The fire of Labor MP Josh Burns' office, the car set alight in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, the attack on the Melbourne synagogue. This is a crime. This needs to stop. And today, the AFP will expand its remit with the support of the Commonwealth Government. Special Operation Avalite will be an agile and experienced squad of counter-terrorism investigators who will focus on threats, violence and hatred towards the Australian Jewish community and parliamentarians. In essence, they will be a flying squad to deploy nationally to incidents. The Commonwealth offences Special Operation Avalite will investigate will include urging violence against members or groups, advocating terrorism, advocating genocide, using a carriage service to make a threat, and using a carriage service to menace or harass. I want to assure the Jewish community that the AFP will continue to provide capability and resources to state and territory police. However, from today, the AFP will take a greater role. The AFP will not tolerate crimes that undermine Australia's security or our way of life.
So this was the press release by the AFP. So it is primarily about threats, violence, hatred towards the Australian Jewish community and parliamentarians. So the 21 AFP police and analysts who are experienced in counter-terrorism will deploy nationally to investigate urging of violence against members of groups, advocating terrorism, advocating genocide, using a carriage service to make a threat, and using a carriage service to menace or harass. You saw the, for people watching, the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus behind the Federal Police Commissioner Reece Kershaw. Mark Dreyfus is, of course, Jewish, and so is the Federal Labor MP Josh Burns, whose seat of Macnamara takes in the synagogue which was attacked. Now, obviously, given that they're Jewish, for Jews, their Jewish identity is very important. So, for the fact that well, Peter Dutton, he accused Josh Burns of not of having lost his voice before the weekend and not stood up to a weak prime minister, which that's pretty outrageous to make that accusation that Mark Dreyfus and Josh Burns are in fact are traitors to their community. I mean, Peter Dutton would be absolutely appalled if an Indigenous leader said that Jacinta Price wasn't properly investigating, it wasn't properly representing Indigenous Australians. But it's okay for Peter Dutton to say that. Now, obviously, as I've been saying, that this has been basically been treated by particularly the Liberal opposition and most of the mainstream media is sort of, this is Australia's October 7, even though thankfully no one died. But Anthony Albanese was criticised because he spent the weekend in Perth as part of his soft election campaign and was playing tennis on Saturday afternoon. It's called his Hawaii moment. He was in Perth. He wasn't halfway across the world and lying about his whereabouts, people were dying in those bushfires. Anthony Albanese wasn't on holiday, and he's going to the synagogue tomorrow. Peter Dutton only went there today, so why didn't he go there right away? Now, as I mentioned, all attacks on places of worship are abhorrent, and so is this. But we had recently a arson attack on an Anglican church in St Leonard's, which is in Ballerine. Four teenagers were charged with arson and burglary, but the vicar called for grace rather than judgment. And you remember earlier this year, it seems to have been memory hold, Bishop Mari Emanuel of the Assyrian Church in southwestern Sydney, stabbed in the eye by that radicalized Muslim teen. Now, that was called a terrorist incident right away because they captured the perpetrator. They're still at large, the perpetrators of this synagogue arson. But Bishop Mari Emanuel said that he forgave his attacker. But obviously here we are seeing the Jewish community, well, they certainly want vengeance and action. And also we have seen many Hindu temples that have been vandalized and attacked this year. Just the latest, there was 2 in Canberra. Now, I'm not saying that we should accept attacks on places of worship as the norm, but I'm saying that to basically say that this is a terrorist attack on the scale of, say, the Link Cafe siege, where 2 people died, were shot dead, and many were taken hostage for 24 hours, or the Christchurch massacre, where 51 Muslims were murdered. Yes, it will be incredibly upsetting to members of the Jewish community and all those who want them to feel welcome in Australia. But to call this one of Australia's most darkest days is certainly an exaggeration, and it's also because it's so polarized in our national politics, the Israel-Palestine conflict, which most Australians are not going to vote on next year. And actually this synagogue was severely damaged in an arson attack in 1995 as well, which was also abhorrent as well. Cooler heads should prevail. And of course we have Benjamin Netanyahu trying to basically strong arm the Australian government back into 100% supporting Israel. Some might call it foreign interference. I mean, you think that it's highly unlikely that the arsonists are like, Australia voted 3 times for Palestine resolutions at the UN. That means we can go and arson attack a synagogue. I don't think so.
Tim's News Explosion.